Hi, I'm Lasse Rindom, and I appreciate you listening in to this episode of The Only Constant. Sharing is caring, and it means a lot. If this episode sparks a thought with you, pass it on. You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Russ D'Sa, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Russ, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super happy to have you here today, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. So, welcome.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Lasse, I've been looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, I'm actually quite, envious of you right now. You're sitting in where, sunny California, and I'm here in cold Copenhagen, or I see the sun outside your window, right?
Yeah. I'm in California, in Silicon Valley, but I don't know. I've never been to Noma, but I'm jealous that you get to go to Noma more easily than than I could.
Yeah, okay, now I should have gone there, right? Thank you for that. I haven't gone there yet, actually, and that's maybe that's actually a fault. Now you mention it. Okay, I'll put that on my bucket list. I need to do that now because now it feels wrong when someone from California tells me to do it. And I
You know,
haven't.
I was I think where was I? I was in Sweden, and I was on the Noma wait list or something, and then they sent me an email saying, "Oh, there's a spot at the communal table. If you can get here." And then so I emailed them and I said, "Oh, well, did you offer this spot to multiple people?" And they said, "Yeah, there's about five or so people that we offered it to." And I said, "Oh, well, who? If I fly there now from Sweden, like who gets in?" And they said, "Whoever's the best dressed."
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
And then you gave
Like,
up.
oh my god, okay, yeah. I gave up my I gotta stop by like an H&M or something, buy like a $50 suit or whatever. Yeah, it was pretty weird. I wasn't
That was
expecting
really
that
weird.
response.
No. That doesn't sound very Danish either, actually, to be honest. We have the poor core thing. Anyway, that's a completely different thing. But Ross, happy to have you here, and let's get to what we're going to talk about today. So, we some months back we had a prep chat where you said on the whole AI market, and I quote. It is easy to see the end state, you said. I'm like, okay, a lot of people cannot see the end state, can't even see what's going to happen in 2 months, right? So, could you elaborate on what it is you're seeing as the end state in AI?
Yeah, I've been having this conversation with a few people lately. I think I would refine what I said from our prep call with I think it's fairly easy to see the end states, plural. Um,
Uh,
no, not trying to be, I don't know, diplomatic here, but I think that there's like really four maybe different ways this could go. And I think that there's like probably a low margin for error. I know that there's a lot of fear mongering about AI and like kind of doomsday scenarios,
mm,
but I actually think those are real. They're definitely real, real possibilities. There's a Wait But Why article that was written, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, um, about kind of the proliferation of AI and superintelligence, I think was actually the topic of that article that was written. And they conceptualize humanity's progress as this log. I don't know if the log is sitting in water, but and spinning, and like humans are like walking along this log. Um, but you can kind of fall off one direction, and it's an extinction event for humanity, and then you can go the other direction, and it's like this utopia that you end up in. And I think that that's like pretty. I think that that is pretty illustrative of kind of how this could go. I think there's two ultimate end states here. One is that it's an age of abundance, and AI is we've succeeded in creating ourselves. Really, like as tool builders, we have created the tool builder, the synthetic tool builder, and we leverage that kind of ultimate tool to doing all the things that humans kind of have to do now in terms of labor and work. And um, there will still be people that are extremely wealthy, but I think that the floor in that world, age of abundance, the kind of the floor keeps moving higher and higher, such that the difference between what like the quote poorest person in the world has and the richest person in the world has in terms of what you can get with that money. The money itself, I don't think really matters, but what can you actually trade that wealth
Mm.
for? I think that floor moves up and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner, such that the delta is not as large as it is today. And
But
so,
still, we've seen the last 10, 15 years that the deltas have grown massively, right?
yeah, I think the delta definitely has grown massively. But I think, in my opinion, this is kind of well, I won't get into politics, but you can talk about some of how this is kind of a side effect of capitalism to a degree. I feel like it's embedded almost as an outcome or a
There's also a
it's kind
thing
of
with, there's the thing with, the whole digital infrastructure is sort of, owned by, most common infrastructure everyone uses has some degree of public control, right? But here you have a digital infrastructure that is privately held, and I think that that's the difference, isn't it? That it's there's so much wealth there amassed.
I think that that's true, and I think that, but it kind of moves in ebbs and flows, right? Even the internet kind of,
Mm.
you went from something that was a bit more centralized to once the internet, came about in the early '90s, or at least proliferated in the early '90s, then it kind of like democratized everything, and every kind of this access to this technology kind of started to diffuse out. But then it kind of consolidated back together with the social internet, and now we have like these hubs that kind of control a lot of it, the traffic, and are arbiters of that traffic and access. And I think what will end up happening is I think that especially kind of the work that Meta and folks are doing with these models, and then DeepSeek came out, and I think that you'll also see this diffusion of AI as well over time. But right now, the models are really massive and they require a massive amount of compute to
Mm.
be able to build these things. But as we converge upon, I think like human level intelligence, the brain, I think, what does it run it in like 20 watts or something like that? It's like very energy efficient. And I think there are going to need to be some breakthroughs along the way for us to be able to get a computer to
Mm.
the same level of efficiency. But if you assume that we do, then I think access to the technology will start to spread and become a bit more democratized. I sometimes joke that with people that uh, there's billions of people that have trained models in the world right now. It's anybody that's a parent, right?
Yeah, yeah, but that's also, I think there was an XKCD joke once that said
Oh yeah.
when I'm just gonna fix or sort my refrigerator content. I'm gonna train a neural network to do it or something like that. It's like it was a
Mm.
bad joke, but same thing, right? So it's gonna use his brain just to sort it, right? Whoa, so impressive! People are like, whoa,
right,
neural network. Oh, cool.
right. Did you see the figure came out with like they showed like the robots putting stuff away in the fridge, and then another one was like doing the dishes or something like that. And there was some joke I saw about when you when you I just like two robots on that are high on drugs or something like that, or like have smoked a lot of weed, and they're like now performing a task, just how slow they were doing it. And it's like, well, is this impressive? I mean, the bar is really high, right? Because you're kind of comparing it to humans. That's really where the bar is.
Yeah.
It is impressive kind of if you ignore that part.
It's like the computer use thing, right? It's going so slow.
Yes, yes, yes.
No.
The frame rate's pretty low, and like the level, the actions per minute or
I'm
whatever are
like,
pretty low.
okay, that's like 10 years before you beat me in Counter Strike. Okay, you're dead.
Totally, totally. But and so I mean, I think this comes back to your original
I'm
question
not good
about
at Counter Strike either. I just,
I'm decent, I'm decent. But uh, fun fact: when you were noisy in a Counter Strike server, yeah, they would have this control which would turn you into a llama, and you would just bleep or and make these weird sounds if you tried to type in chat. It's just funny that now we have a model called Llama,
yeah.
which, in any case, so the question about kind of where this goes in the end state, yeah, I mean the models are not great right now. Of course, the embodied AI moves really slow. It's nowhere near a human, um, but so I think there's this world that we can do this responsibly, improve these models, embody them, put them in robots, and um,
Yeah, you
they
gave
kind
me, end states. You gave me four ways, you said, and then you gave me doomsday's real, and then you gave me abundance.
yeah, okay,
I'm looking for the next two, Russ.
so the yeah, so the well, so there's two scenarios. There's Age of Abundance or there's Doomsday, right? Like end of the
Yeah,
species. And then I think within end of the species, there's kind of three possibilities. So the first possibility is that we leverage AI to kill each other. So humans basically destroy one another, either through using AI to create
mm,
weapons, or using AI to create diseases, et cetera, right?
yeah,
That like we can spread and infect people in with. Then there's kind of the evil digital AI where it only exists in our devices, but because we live on the internet effectively now and all these systems are connected, there's this book called Damon by Daniel Suarez. I don't know if you've read it, but it came out in
no.
like 2009, 2008, something like that, mid 2000s maybe. Um, and it's about this video game developer, I believe, and he dies, and then he all of a sudden, like, I don't know if he did video games, maybe, but he he has this directive when he dies where this AI system that exists purely digitally just can take control of things like cars and door frames that are electrified and other kinds of things. And then he like has this system. He has a bunch of money in a bank account, kind of like a crypto account in some ways, and he has these bounties for like, hey, mercenary, human mercenary, go kill this person, and then like if
Mm,
I verify it through like a news source, like crawling or scraping a news source, then I'll the money ends up in your account and all this stuff, and he effectively leverages his AI system posthumously to destroy or create a lot of destruction, in society. And so I think that that's a second way possibility. And then I think the third one is as these models get better and better, we embody them within robots, and then of course the robots take over and enslave humanity, or go to war with humanity. And uh, so I think that there are those three possibilities there in my mind on the destruction side or on the doomsday side. Um,
There's
I don't
also
know which.
I also I don't know, now we're going down that route, right? Route, right? And I think there's also, you're also missing the whole, this, we might just stay on Earth, right? But we'll send robots to the whole galaxy because they can survive in outer space, right? That would also
Yeah,
be an interesting. So they will proliferate, and we'll just be stuck here as a minor species. That's also a fun one, and I think maybe we could also hibernate in some kind of AI-driven world, and then we just, all of us, like, this is much better than the real world. There's no pain, then we just die in silence.
that's the Matrix kind of version, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, 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 because they're evil, right? But this is just, we just die in silence, and then at some point, the last windmill goes silent, and the last server shuts down because no one's maintaining it. Everyone's just dreaming away, and
One rebuttal to the kind of AI doomsday that I've heard from some friends that I've talked to is that, like, well, AI doesn't really have any like primal instincts. It it doesn't need to eat, doesn't need to sleep. It like doesn't have these things that it has to optimize for that humans try to optimize for.
Mm, mm.
Status, does it care about status? And I would say though that, I mean, again, not going to get political or really dive too deep into it, but um, there are people in the world that are extremely wealthy, have everything, all the status, yet they're continually driven. And I think that in the animal kingdom, you see that there are animal species that are alphas, right? That effectively, in some way, desire power, control, influence over their peers. And so for that specific directive, like my question I have is like, is that actually part of our DNA? Is that actually hardwired into us? Is that something that AI would not desire? Would it
I
not
think
desire
so.
power and control?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's this thing that I've been I would want to say with abundance, we are scarcity creatures. We live on a scarce. We only have this pie, and we have to share it all of us, and that'll take more than you do. So someone will dominate, right? That's the point of how we work. I think, and I think the whole world of abundance is a great idea. I'm just not sure it fits the human instinct and all these things. What are we actually suited for? Are we even suited for the lives we're living today? Right? That's also the next problem, right? But I also think that you have these two things you say, that someone will leverage it to kill everyone, or someone will set an AI up with a narrow goal function to kill everyone, or something like that, right? That's the two first ones you said, and I think that's more realistic. I think Carl Friston on the episode I had with him, he said, and I think because from a very purist way of looking at intelligence, it will only be real intelligence, he says, when it has the need to self evidence.
Mm,
So when it asks Russ about you because it's genuinely interested, or it is important for it to ask you, but it's never important for it because it's always pre-trained. Nothing's important to it.
mm,
When it goes to take a dip in the water, the robot just goes to the beach and like, why did you? I don't know. I had time to kill. I just wanted to do something for myself. When that happens, you have intelligence, it says, right? Because it has a self-evidencing in the now need, but they're always pre-trained in some way. So there's something there that they just don't inherently have the same needs as we do, right? But
yeah, I think that that's true. They don't inherently have the exact same needs that we do.
it's just difficult, right? Because there's these whole Hollywood genres, right, around all these things as well, right? So we're
It-
like,
well, and so that's another interesting point, right? Is that there's kind of no new ideas under the sun. Like a lot of these things have been envisioned or thought about. Humans have been around for a long time and maybe had more time to think about the possibilities of the world. But
mm,
um, we the idea of creating AI or the idea of having like voice computing or these interfaces of anthropomorphized AI, like it. These are not new ideas. And in some ways we're kind of fulfilling these prophecies, but how come, I guess what I would ask is like, why are we sometimes when we look back at sci-fi, we look back at like kind of these utopian visions of sci-fi and it's like, okay, yeah, we're building that, but
mm.
how come not the dystopian ones? How come we're not building those?
Yeah, and I think I want to get to that question, right? I want to ask you, Russ. You are building tools for this with LiveKit, right? That would
Mhm.
actually get us to somewhere, right? So you're building for the utopian or dystopian part of this story. If you
I
say
like that.
dystopian, I'm going to shut this conversation off right now.
Well, I think fundamentally for us, for LiveKit, we're not training the models.
Mm.
I'd say the utopian versus dystopian future is largely based on the training regimen and criteria. But
Some would say the use, right? And you are
yeah, yeah,
enabling
yeah,
the use, aren't you?
that's true. We are enabling the use, but I would say is though that it's tricky. I'm just trying to like think about how could what we work on be used. So we work on infrastructure that makes it easier for people to build with these models and build interfaces like voice interfaces
Mm.
to AI, make it easy for AI to be able to see you, So effectively giving it access to cameras and microphones instead of keyboards and mice as the inputs and outputs of the model.
So,
Um,
are you selling to the American army or the Russian army or someone or
we are not selling to the military or the government as of today. Um, we don't have FedRAMP, so we can't. They never buy
no?
from
But you
us.
know, we help the robots see you. Oh, thank you, Russ. You know, you see, you see, we're all just engineers, and suddenly we built something, right? That's also what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, there's absolutely the possibility of, and we've discussed it internally before in the past. I remember, like, I remember asking the team, like, well, how would you feel about um, if we ever sold to the government or the military? Um, Certainly mixed answers because it kind of depends on the use case. So to give you
Mm,
an example, like we today we power 25% of 911 emergency. It's not military, but it's related to criminal justice
mm,
and then Skydio built like their police drone teleop system on top of LiveKit.
mm,
And in both of those scenarios, in the 911 scenario, you can stream video to the dispatch center. There's an AI agent that will sit on a 911 call, and if you start to stream video, it will actually like automatically highlight license plates. It will like detect firearms
mm.
automatically and draw kind of bounding boxes around these and identify them, and then pull in police or local law enforcement agencies. Skydio's product with the drone teleops allows them to kind of do surveillance and kind of security across like a bunch of different drones that are, and as the precinct kind of controls
Russ,
these things.
everything
Yeah,
you're saying right now would to some people sound extremely dystopian.
yeah. Uh, I think
I'm just
this.
saying it now. We have this conversation, right? We
Well, yeah,
started
yeah,
this
for
way, right?
sure. I think
Drones
it's
viewing you, knowing who you are. What are you doing?
sure, sure,
Disarm
yeah.
that man.
Well, I think it's nuanced, right? Because I think dystopian versus utopian really comes down to there's definitely outcomes, right? If you watch like
Mm,
a movie, there's definitely outcomes, but I think intent matters as well.
yeah.
I think the intent with 911 or even with the police drone use case, it's not to kind of surveil society broadly, but to leverage technology to be able to solve problems in society and to help secure and keep safe society. And it is a slippery slope, though, right? Because
Mm.
that you might have good intentions, but if you go too far, you can very quickly slip into 1984.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, right?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope, and so the question really comes down to like human intent and responsibility. Like how far do you push this? To give you a different example, there's a company in Australia that uses us for they fly drones over the beaches in Australia, and they use our computer vision functionality to detect when there are sharks
Mm,
inbound, and then like drown victims who are out swimming or surfing. And then you have Coast Guard or lifeguard come in and either corral everyone in if there's a shark that's swimming in inbound, or go and help a drowned victim. Um, and even that, right? Like I think that's like a very benevolent use case, but
mm.
again, it's a camera that's flying on a computer and is capturing all this footage, and it's like, well, if you keep pushing that farther and farther, then all of a sudden you have 1984. So it's I think it really it's
It's
I don't.
also, it's an unfair question, right, Russ? It's totally, you're an engineer, you're building something, you're building things, you're making it better. You see the benevolent use cases, of course you're doing that, right? But that also, there's a question. I don't know if do you believe in deregulation or regulation of this? Should this be regulated? And right now, I think you'd have to say yes, it should. but, but
Oh,
I'm
I
asking
mean,
you.
no, no. I mean, I honestly do think it needs to be regulated.
Mm.
That's the honest truth, not just saying it for the podcast. But no, I think that there needs to be like systems of control
Mm.
that we have to effectively have speed bumps, right? Like I think things can quickly get out of control if If we just put our foot on the gas. I think that there needs to be
Yeah, but
more
you're
minds.
adding this muscle and this physicality to the AI models and what we can do with technology, right? Because you're giving the multimodality like that, right? And that's what you're doing in LiveKit. But it also goes back to everywhere, some kind of technology touches a human endpoint. We should have considerations, right? Isn't that what we're sort of learning? And yet there's this push for deregulation right now as well, right? It's a little bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that I think in my opinion, I'm not super deep on the topic and like all of the different arguments, but I think that at least some folks who are pushing for deregulation, I think we're really looking at kind of the current state and saying, oh, well, this is pretty far away from like any kind of doomsday scenario,
Mm.
any kind of takeoff event. We're pretty far from that. So, like, why put the speed bumps up before we've really gotten, above 40 or whatever? I guess your kilometers, but I was talking miles. But it's, I think that that might be part of the argument.
There's
But
also this,
honestly,
the signing before the event, right? Because you don't, as someone said, I think Doug Shannon said on the podcast, we don't want to have to put up a stop sign because people died, right? We'd rather say this is a dangerous crossing, right? Or it's also very difficult to take rights away from people when they start using it, right? You saw the TikTok ban. I'm not no opinion on TikTok, but people were like, oh, killing
oh
my
yeah, yeah,
livelihood, right? So if you
yeah,
already give people access to something and then you later on decide, oh, this is bad, it's really difficult to take it away. Just ask any European welfare setup. It's very difficult to take rights away.
yeah. Not
Um,
even totally anything really, right? Like I remember
yeah.
I've worked on consumer apps in the past. I was pretty early at Twitter, and we always talked about how even for features in an app, like once you give it, you cannot take it
No,
away, and
exactly.
so yeah, you do need to be careful about that. And I think the other part that warrants caution and regulation is that we're also on an exponential curve with technological progress. I don't know if you've ever read "The Singularity Is Near" from Ray Kurzweil, or like any of his kind of early books on AI that he published kind of in the '90s and 2000s. But he kind of illustrates technological progress as a series of S curves, where
Mm.
you kind of have like a slow adoption cycle, then an explosion, and then once it's kind of mainstream and proliferated, it kind of slows down again and it kind of looks logarithmic. And then, of course, there's another breakthrough, and then the S curve starts again. Um, and we just kind of keep riding that all the way towards the singularity. And I think he predicted the singularity would hit in 2030. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. Maybe it's 2050. I can't remember which one, but
I always say if people say 30 years out, it's because they don't believe it will happen. While if you say that fusion energy will be here in 30 years, it means that it will be here when I'm retired, so I'm not responsible for my comment here, right? But if you
yeah,
say if you say 10 years, then you have to answer to your prediction, right?
totally, that's true. You can kind of wash your hands of it
Yeah,
if it's far enough out. Um, but no, we're on an exponential curve, and it's very hard for us to see that just sitting in a certain point on
yeah.
that curve. Um, and so, if you believe that that is true and that's the trajectory we're on, like it warrants that we need to start thinking about this stuff now.
Mm.
We can't just because things look like they're pretty far off from the doomsday picture right now, tomorrow, will be that much closer to it. So I think um, yeah, I'm in favor of regulation.
There's this weird thing right now with I think the weirdest thing for me, and without even mentioning anything, I just think the last 10 years, I grew up here, and I think we're about the same age. I don't know your age, Russ. I'm 41. I don't know how old you are.
We're the same age. I'm
Same
41 as
age,
well.
41.
Yeah,
Brilliant generation, right? It was awesome. Best,
the
83,
best.
83. Oh, better.
83. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh
What
yeah,
what month?
October.
Oh, I'm May, so I'm a little older
Oh, a
than you.
little older. Okay, good. But but it's actually in Denmark it's the smallest generation in 150 years. But the funny thing is that I grew up with this whole trusting and loving Google, giving me free products, this belief in
Hmm.
the internet, right, and sharing of knowledge and freedom, Wikipedia, all that. This explosion of just opportunity, right. And then I feel like suddenly creeping in on me last 10 years that technology has suddenly taken on a political voice. Like now, tech is opinionated, and I'm like, I really hate that. Just just give me platforms, right? Don't have an opinion. Don't change my feed. Don't. don't use my data for crap. Just
There's it's interesting because like we both said we're not going to talk about politics, and I'm
mm,
still going to try to not talk about politics. You probably will too.
yeah,
But what's so hard about doing that now is that politics and technology are getting so close together. I mean, you can
yeah.
look at the inauguration that happened,
The
right? Like
front row, right? The front row, man.
when have you seen all the big tech companies at an inauguration? Like never.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. It feels so far away from the 2005 me who just like, oh, I love my new
Totally.
Gmail, right?
Yeah, it is. We are quite a long ways away from that. And it's interesting because there has been like sci-fi TV shows. I mean, I think there was a really bad one with Ben Affleck that I watched. I'm kind of a sucker for all these things, even if they're terrible, just because of the thematic aspects. But I think in that TV show, I'm pretty sure it's Ben Affleck, but there are these companies and they're sovereign states, and they are effectively these governments that control all of society, and you pick which one you work for, and they kind of fight against each other. Um, and we're like, I don't know, if you squint, it's like kind of starting to look like
Mm.
that a little bit, right? I'm not trying to kind of paint the doomsday scenario now, but it's starting to look a little bit like that. And yeah, we're the same age. We grew up kind of in the same era, and technology did feel a bit more freewheeling. And I think that
Can we get back to that? Do you think
I don't think so.
the lost
Well,
golden age is
the thing is like there was a time where
a little bit sad
technology.
too that Google is my 50s diner milkshakes and stuff. But anyway, golden age.
Well, like I think that the way that society relates to a particular thing kind of depends on the level of scale of that thing,
Mm,
right? Technology was kind of in the early days, it wasn't as distributed, and people didn't have access, and it was more like a freewheeling. My dad has been kind of in the valley since the 80s, and starting companies and
mm.
GPUs and semiconductors. And sometimes we'll talk about how back then, it felt more like people were the mentality was like engineering in terms of like curiosity.
Mm.
It's
Yeah, but you
like
also had to go to the computer. You had to move into a room to turn
you
on a
did,
computer, right? Now
you did.
suddenly it's a parallel all the time, and we're just one
Mhm.
step away from, the computer going into the room where we are instead, right? That's
That's true. Actually, technology comes to you. You don't come to it. In some
I have
ways.
this comic I'm sharing tomorrow on LinkedIn where there's like two elephants in the room saying like, so when should we talk about Carl? And then Carl is just standing there because Carl is now the Carl in the room, right? You see, instead of the so so two
Uh,
AI model saying when should we talk about this human who's here, right? But turning it around, right?
no, totally. And I think, yeah, it's an interesting time. I do not think that I think there's no going back. Um, like technology is too widely distributed now,
Mm,
that I think kind of like the indie exploration days where it wasn't about making money or power and influence, and it was just about kind of building stuff,
mm.
um, and progress. I feel like people do still care about progress, and they still care about building stuff, but there's just so much power, influence, money, and status associated with technology and technological progress now that
But are you still being, you started your career, founding something called Chat Roulette, right, to connect people, right?
mhm.
Can you explain that a little bit, right? You're sort of like it was about connecting people, right? It's still about that, Russ. It's still about making the world, better that way.
I think there was a time, during the internet when we were growing up and like um, in our 20s, where the internet was still this very isolated place. Like in the 1990s, mid 90s, all the way through to early 2000s, that first kind of internet boom, um, is really like all the software and services you could put online that now you don't have to go to like I don't know, the DMV. You still got to go to the DMV, unfortunately, in the United States, but you you could like do a bunch of you could access a bunch of services that you would ordinarily have to go to a physical place. You could do them over the internet, but it wasn't like a multiplayer experience. It wasn't like there were other people there that
Mm,
you could interact with, and then the kind of the social internet, or Web 2.0, came about, and all of a sudden, these experiences kind of became multiplayer to a degree, and it's like, oh well, there's other people out there, and you can find
mm.
your tribe on the internet, right? If you can't find your tribe necessarily in your neighborhood,
Dating
and so
apps. Yeah.
the dating apps, definitely, yeah, I worked on that too. That's kind of what my chat roulette thing was at first.
Oh,
Like, what was
okay,
it?
cool.
Well, it's like, what's the first application of this, right? Like, okay, I can now cameras are being built into laptops, portable computers that I can take with me anywhere, and I can connect with another human using this camera anywhere in the world. Like, it's teleportation technology, and so like, what are you going to do with that? Well, meet people over the internet for the first time, meet strangers. When do we meet strangers? I mean, dating is probably the most
Yeah.
common motivation to meet strangers, and so
Dating
that
and
was
podcasting.
dating. Exactly. Right, right, right. And podcasting wasn't that big back then, though. It still hadn't emerged as a medium. And I guess we had talk shows, though. Like, so,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of a version of that, more democratized talk shows. But yeah, I think that was the first application, and I thought it was just so amazing. For me, I grew up during my dad, I mentioned, was like kind of in semiconductors and GPUs. And one of the nice benefits of it was we used to get just free computer hardware from all his friends that worked at these companies. So we had like, I don't know, 6 PCs in the house in the early
Nice.
90s. They were all like LAN networked. And I would have friends over, and we play Doom multiplayer and these video games. And
Mm.
I just thought it was so amazing that you could link computers together and interact with people, over close distances in your neighborhood, but also long distances anywhere in the world.
Mm.
And so I was just very enamored and intrigued by the way that you could um, effectively use computer networks for teleportation. I can have my presence somehow communicated
But
across the world in
that's
less
what
than
you're
100.
still, and that's what you're still doing then, Russ, isn't it?
It's full circle. Yeah. I'm like, a friend of mine said that you have a kind of a way, we all have kind of a way of coming back to work on the same problems
Mm.
throughout our life. And um, that was kind of the original spark for me. It was never really the computer that was interesting to me, but the computer networks that were interesting to me. And now, yes, we're very much kind of working on that again. Albeit with like a different user or customer in mind, right? Like,
Mm.
but the chat roulette one was a consumer product. And this time it's a developer oriented product. But yeah, I think that it's interesting because I think like connecting with other humans is such a magical thing, and I think uh, it unlocks like the potential of what the internet is capable of doing. Um, but then at the same time, I think we've also our relationship with computers has changed too, and we kind of retreat to our devices now. We're still kind of looking at what other people are doing, but maybe not interacting with other people.
Mm.
We're more like observing them, and I think people always talk about how society is getting more and more lonely, and we aren't able to kind of like communicate with one another and be vulnerable with one another, and then you have AI coming in, which can now you can talk to it, I guess, partially partially enabled by LiveKit, but now you can have conversations with these AI models. And
Yeah, but maybe we should do that, right? Maybe we should build a instead of chat roulette, build a vulnerability roulette. So make some AI who tells you things that makes you cry, and then you switch to a human, and then you're crying with someone, and then you're sitting there sharing your emotions, right? Maybe we should do that.
speed date with AI.
Speed,
That's
speed emotion, speed vulnerable, speed vulnerability. I don't know. Can we do that?
You can. It's not a bad idea. I mean, there's a few people that are building on LiveKit that are building AI. It's a common use case with ChatGPT, advanced voice mode, actually, where um, you effectively use AI as your therapist.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, and
and
that
so
says a lot
you,
about, cognitive therapists because it can put it can be so, almost recipe like, right? I think that says a lot.
it I think that's true. I mean, they're really ultimately like therapists. I'm not to diminish what they do.
No.
I mean, I think that they're wonderful, but
No, but I also use it. I use therapists, right? Done
yeah,
multiple times. I always just like this, a little bit. I think sometimes some of these cognitive, some of these, formal therapy
they're
schools, they become too formal, right? And not enough in the room with me. I think I need something that's in the room with me, right? And that's
yeah,
where,
totally. And I think the other part is this is a little bit of an artifact of scale, which is that therapists can sometimes lean too hard into theory,
mm.
and kind of in some ways like one size fits all.
And
Um,
then they're just a
that,
GPT. That's my problem, right?
that's what I mean, right?
Mm.
Like, so I think the farther you lean into kind of like the theory, and just applying the theory kind of across the
Mm.
board, the more you kind of get a little bit GPT like. I mean, that's how GPT is trained, right? It's
Yeah.
trained across tons and tons of data, so it's established effectively what the statistical norm is, and
Yeah.
and then it just spits that out over and over and over, right? So yes.
But let's get a little bit closer to what you do at LiveKit because I think that's really interesting, and I want to cover that a little bit as well, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
sure.
said the animal species and alpha, and I've been recently I decided to try to dive into something new. So I've been diving some years back. I dove into when I was driving my car. I just read listened to some audiobooks on quantum
Mhm,
mechanics and all that because I felt now I need to do something different and difficult.
mhm,
Something that takes more than 5 minutes to understand because then it's worth my time. But now I sort of said, okay, I need to do that again. I need to do something, listen to something else. And so I started doing something about um, uh, fauna and how it has changed over
oh,
500 million years. I found a book that was interesting. I'm not. Let me see. I don't know if it's going to be good, but just talking about ecosystems and how it and it spoke about the potential niche for a species and the realized niche for a species, and then if those if there's no more realized niche, they die, they go extinct, right,
mhm,
basically.
mhm,
But how are we building a potential niche for AI, and how is that going to maybe down the road we can discuss the realized niche. Is this going to be everything we could imagine it could be today? Will it also be that? That's a different question, right? But how are you building now the full? You're building the niche for it. You're building the niche, ecosystem animal. You're giving it arms and legs and eyes and ears, right, Russ?
mhm.
So what is the vision here?
So I think that the vision is,
Where will it live?
yeah. Well, I think that there's two primary places that AI will live. It will live in all of our personal devices for sure. Um, Already starting to, right, with
Mm,
apps like ChatGPT and Grok and Apple Intelligence and all of these things. It'll live there, and then it'll also live in robots as well, humanoid robots, and that navigate the world and that you can interact with similarly to how you interact with humans. And I think that what we're doing is we're really building infrastructure that allows you to build AI applications that feel more human to use. Um, right? Like for the longest time, the computer was this kind of not so smart machine, but very much a machine that like does stuff for you, right? Like not so different from a typewriter or networked typewriter.
mm,
Um, and you have these peripherals, these kind of weird things. Like I have a keyboard with like the, QWERTY laid out and I had to
Mm.
take a class in elementary school on how to type on this thing quickly. And so you kind of have to adapt your natural human behaviors. You have to learn how to give the machine information so it can do work for you.
Mm.
That's ultimately what the keyboard and the mouse are designed to do, or even the gamepad on like for an Xbox or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, these peripherals that we have to adapt or learn how to use to give the machine information, so it can help us. And I think as the computer gets smarter, as it becomes more human-like in the way that it thinks and its capabilities, no longer does a human have to adapt to the computer, but the computer starts to adapt to the human. And so I think the first form of that is it takes input and outputs in the same way that a human does. So humans use eyes, ears, and mouths primarily. They also use touch and movement and
Mm.
things like that. Um, and the computer, the equivalent for the computer, these sensors that humans naturally have built into their bodies. The computer version of those sensors are cameras, microphones, and speakers.
Mm.
And so what we're doing is we started off really building like this transport network for AI, or the nervous system. I've said in some places that hooks up to the brain, where you get this sensor information from cameras and microphones out there in the world, and then how do you carry that information as fast as possible
Mm.
to that brain, and then like when the brain generates an output, how do you carry that output back down through the nervous system to kind of like the sensors on the other end, a screen in this case, or it might be an Apple Vision Pro, or et
Mm.
cetera,
Yeah.
smart glasses. There's all kinds of different ways that the output can be rendered. Um, and then, of course, like with a humanoid robot, following the same analogy, like the output there would be movement, right, of some sort, very similar to us. Um, and I think that there's two benefits to doing this. I think one benefit is, well, I think the primary benefit for me is that it helps the computer empathize with us a bit
Mm.
more. um, when a model can take in audio and understand the expressiveness of what we're saying, the nuances of our speech, can detect our emotional state, like embedded within the information, right? Like you can kind of tell when I say something, if I'm sad or if I'm excited or if I'm happy, um, by looking at me and then listening to me. And you kind of adjust your behaviors or how you communicate with me based on my emotional state. That's something that's very difficult to do for a computer unless it has kind of this rich input, that it
Mm.
can leverage. And so I think what it ends up doing, it's kind of bidirectional. It helps us connect more intimately with the computer, and it helps the computer kind of empathize with us. When you kind of level up the inputs and the outputs to the stage of, or the plane of, how humans kind of communicate with one another. So I see that as like the core benefit of kind of what we do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can also go in that's super interesting, but what about, some people are saying, "Let's go straight to brain implants," right? How does that fit into to that niche that you're having here for your tool?
Yeah, I think that, so brain implants, I think, are another thing that's going to happen. But that's kind of on the other side. Like well,
Funny thing is, I think I see you being so conflicted on this whole dystopian thing we started off with, right? Now you're talking about all these things, and every
well,
time you're saying anything, I'm sitting here thinking about drones. I'm just, oh, intimacy, and drones
it's
with
it's
guns, drones with guns, drones with guns. I go, I'm like, no, no, no. Brain
it's
implants,
it's
drones with
it,
guns.
it's very hard to see beyond. to really see where this is all going to go, right?
Oh
Or
yeah.
I think it's easy I think it's easy to imagine the different scenarios. And I'm not the first one who has. Like, people have
No.
imagined this for a long time, but um, it's impossible from here, I think, to know which way it's going to go, right?
But I think
And
we spoke in December, right? That it's easy to see the end state, and now it's not easy to see it anymore, Russ. I think that's interesting.
easy to see the end states, right? Which one is it going to be? Which end state? I don't know. I really don't. But I think that you were saying, what did you ask me?
No, but I just with the end states and all that, I just said that I just basically interrupted you and said everything you said sounded like it was for the drones with guns, right? So
No, yeah, definitely not for the drones with guns. Though they may end up having guns. I mean, they have something on. I think they have like bombs on them. I think you can
and then
drop
you just
bombs.
give them a Samuel L. Jackson, do you feel lucky, punk, or something like that,
Oh,
and,
jeez.
yeah, and then
Or yeah. Don't watch
say what one
RoboCop.
more again at a time, say what again, say what.
I yeah. I think on the way to that, hopefully that's not what's going to end up happening. But I think on the way to that, um,
Your Robot Future, directed by Tarantino, Quentin.
so I know what you asked me now. You asked me about Neuralink or brain implants, and there's definitely a world where LiveKit, what we do, is not needed anymore, right? I think if
Mm.
everybody has brain implants and you can interface with computers just by like sending some thoughts, and you can interface with other human beings by sending thoughts. Um, Not
But
saying that like what we do now with the transport network part of it will be the only product or only service that we
But
have.
but I love
But
one of the things. There's an arch here, right, in the conversation, right? Because there's also this. I think there's in the beginning there's a lot of the whole. I think the end states to some extent, and it's very it's very sci-fi influenced to some extent. Very it is right. How do we see how the world will end and but there's always also something here that's the opposite of that side because I think that the future, even if it's dystopian or utopian, it will be the worst sci-fi book almost in the whole world, right? Because it will be like every sci-fi movie we see with robots, they talk because they have to. I saw this the creator the other day where they and then they start
oh
killing some
yeah,
robots. They started killing some robots in a room, and then the other robots run outside and say, "Help! Help! Hey, come on! You don't shout help. You just send a protocol somewhere, and then the other ones know and they come running, right? They know you're getting attacked.
It-
The-
that,
you don't get the
that,
point of robotics, right? You don't. These robots didn't have life kit. What's going on?
that's so funny because that you mentioned that, because this is like something that always bugs me about like older sci-fi movies, is that they'll pick they'll pick like one thing out of the movie to imagine like as a super
Yeah.
future kind of technology or situation, but then like they'll still use rotary phones or something. It's like it's like they don't take all of the things to the future state of how they'll exist. They only like pick this one
No, and if it's
thing,
a hive mind, it'll
and
just be a silent movie, right? Just be robots going around, just
it
communicating. You
wouldn't
can't
be.
even hear it.
It definitely wouldn't make for good TV or entertaining TV. But
And also that thing with R2D2 that can break every door in the newest Death Star in the whole universe, and R2D2 is a scrapyard bot, right? What's wrong with the
totally,
cybersecurity of?
it's true. Yeah,
But so Laurie and Pratt said in episode 25 that the Wright brothers might have invented the airplane, but they did not invent the airline, right? So we have some large language models now, or some AI foundational models
mhm.
that are sort of like the airplane, and then we're sort of trying to build the airline, but the airline needs an airport, right? So
Mhm.
how are you supporting these new business models, and is that even something you can see or are seeing in a different way? Because everyone's looking at that, looking for that. How are these AI agents going to change the whole way we do business models and value propositions in the future, right? Is this going to be is this going to be a complete revamp of what we're doing, or is it just going to be insertions into how we're already operating? What do you honestly think here, Russ? And what are you seeing in some of the use cases of LiveKit today?
Yeah, I think that that comment on that thought on kind of the Wright brothers and the airplane and eventually of airlines and airports. I think that that's really an artifact of scale.
Mm.
Um, and you need airports, and you end up having airlines once you scale things up. Um, just to fly one plane somewhere every once in a while probably doesn't warrant having airports all around the world and
Mm.
airlines that are capitalizing commercially on this industry. And so I really do think that kind of infrastructure layer, you can draw a direct analogy to it with what LiveKit is working on. For example, I think that the magical thing that we have here with these LLMs, if you call that the airplane, we have this probabilistic computer.
Mm.
Um, it doesn't exactly function the same way the human brain does, but or is not, and it isn't trained in the exact same way and doesn't learn in the exact same way as a human brain. But um, fundamentally, like the human brain is also a probabilistic computer, and so that is kind of like the unifying thread between this technology and us, and so you have this probabilistic computer. How do you like actually leverage it? How do you build with it? How do you, as you mentioned, like these insertion points, like how do you actually make it practically usable
Mm.
to do things for us, to help us, to make us more productive, et cetera, um, to make society better. And so I like to say that we are building those airports and those airlines. Like we're really we're building the infrastructure, the deterministic infrastructure around that probabilistic computer. Um, just to explain that a little bit more, when I mean like deterministic versus probabilistic, you don't want, like, just to take like a specific thing like um, patient intake at a hospital, right?
Mm.
You want, if you're going to put an AI in there to answer the phone and help get an appointment booked or something like that with a doctor, you don't want that entire flow to actually be probabilistic. You don't
Mm.
want the AI to sometimes put the appointment on the calendar and let the doctor know. Sometimes it won't.
Mm.
There's actually, in a lot of these like workflows in business, it's a very deterministic flow.
Yeah.
The part that AI helps in is, what we do today is we have a human being that answers the phone, and that human being is able to understand natural language input and communicate back to you with natural language output. But then the flow that they're going through, which questions they ask, and the insurance that they have to capture, and what's wrong with you or what you're experiencing, and then putting the appointment down on the calendar, all of that is like a fixed process that,
Decision tree, right?
yeah, that has like, yeah, it's deterministic, and it needs to
Mm.
happen the exact same way every single time. um, and so what you want is, when you're putting AI into that flow or an LLM into that flow, you actually want it to kind of do the parts that the human is doing, in terms of that are a bit more open ended, like understanding natural language,
Mm.
and communicating back to you with it, and making sure it obtains all the right information and can parse the information that you're giving to it. But then it's also like at a layer below, moving through this very deterministic flow. I need to get this, I need to get this information, I need to book the appointment, I need to all of that stuff. And so um, you can think of what LiveKit is doing is building the infrastructure, not just for the voice and computer vision and all of that, um, but also the framework or infrastructure that allow you to plug in an LLM and walk through a complex task in a deterministic way. And so there's this sort of orchestration step where you hand off a task to the AI, it starts to do its thing, and then once it has finished collecting the information that's necessary, it lets the deterministic kind of or
Mm.
the procedural part of the stack, which is built on LiveKit, know. And then what we do is we kind of manage the state machine of moving you through these different states up until you build your program in that way, and you
Mm.
kind of hand off certain portions or tasks to the AI, and then when the AI is done, it hands control back over. And so
Yeah, that's
we're
what it
kind
is when you're controlling arms and all that, right?
Yes. So we're really building, like, as you said, like the airline, I think, or the airport is one kind of analogy. The other one I would say is that maybe is a little more apt in this specific example, is that the LLM is like the train and we're building the rails.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
right? That keep that train kind of on track and moving forward, or moving in the direction that it needs to go. And so, uh,
But we need
yeah, I
to
mean,
do we need to build all these things? Do we need to build all these so we're building these probabilistic AIs, right? They can do anything. That's the dream, the full 100% AI agent that can do everything. And yet you're just saying that, oh, but we need to make sure it does what we want it to do and put it into these procedures, right? So
yeah, and so I think that, like, you also asked about insertion points and stuff like that. I think that that's kind of how technology always moves. Is it goes from like this frontier type of thing, or new behavior, a new it unlocks new capabilities, to, okay, well, what are the obvious applications of those abilities? And those are always insertions. The
mm,
obvious use cases are always insertions.
yeah.
Where you say, oh, well, I can replace this and I can replace that and I can integrate this here. Um, and then what comes after that are the non-obvious use cases, or what sometimes people refer to as like the native applications of that technology. In mobile, you saw this where uh, people effectively took a website and then like put it onto a mobile phone, and it works the same way, and even the design isn't responsive, so you would have to, like, pinch and zoom in and click on buttons that you could
Yeah.
barely see. But then you had something that emerged like Uber or like Snap, which leveraged kind of like the form factor and the native kind of sensors on the device, and put those together into an application that felt very much like it was designed specifically for that device natively.
But that
And
is also the bet right now, right, in the whole AI world is to, we're betting hard on something, to some extent, I think we're solutionizing right now more than demand warrants, right? That's the
mhm,
thing I'm thinking a lot about, right? You saw the Safe Super Intelligence, Ilya's new venture, right? It's without a
mhm,
product, it's worth as much or more than, like Maersk, which is one of the biggest Danish companies. And
yep,
I think at one point transported around 6% of the world's GDP around, in ships. They have tons of assets. And now
mhm,
here is an AI company with no assets because he won't release a product until he has safe super intelligence. Uh, they have no product, they have no assets, and they're worth more than a company that transport, like, I don't know, a couple of percentages of the world's GDP. Are we building for the non-obvious use cases here? Are we just investing hard in that and thinking that will happen at that scale? And or because what I hear you're saying as well, because I always say that hype is only moving this fast because it's frictionless. It's just moving through a space out there, touching nothing. It's just moving faster and faster and faster, bigger numbers, touching nothing really. And what you're
mhm,
saying is, you're actually trying to build, with LiveKit so that these models can touch the world, right? And then it becomes more difficult and slows down a little bit, right? And then you're like, oh, it's okay just with the GPT, I don't know, 4 or something. I don't really need the newest ones. Or one
yep,
is actually a disturbance. I don't know, right?
yeah, yeah, totally. There's definitely like, I think you have to lay down the tracks and the rails for hype to kind of start to match reality, right?
Mm,
In some ways, you can think of like tracks or rails as like grounding something. I won't get
mm.
into maglevs and then take this analogy all
No.
into like a weird place, but yeah, you're definitely right. It's funny that you used Maersk as the example, because my partner, she's a special needs preschool teacher, so very different industry, but
Mm.
she'll sometimes try to explain to people what LiveKit does, and she'll use Maersk as an example. She's like, "Well, you know how they like carry like cargo? Well, like that's what LiveKit kind of does too. It's like a network, and they carry bytes instead of carrying like shipping containers." And it's funny they use that example, but um, I think like with Ilya's company, and some of the other like AI labs that are starting and raising these really
Mm,
big rounds. I mean, one reason for those big rounds, big valuations, is just fundamentally that it's expensive to train these models, and so
mm.
it's kind of like you have to raise that much money right now. But I think, backing up and thinking about it, compared to like a company that's powering 1% of the GDP. Um, I think it's the difference between kinetic and potential energy in physics, right?
Mm.
Um, Maersk is like literally moving stuff, right? Like it's a company that has been around for a long time. They're at scale. Whereas Ilya's company, or the other prominent AI labs, it's it's mostly all potential energy.
It's like the
Um,
potential niche, right? They're building for a potential. They're building, for we're building this animal that could potentially be everywhere, right? But then in
yeah,
the end, you're saying, okay, but it doesn't work here. It's there's a limited niche for it. Sorry.
yeah. I think and I mean, we could definitely most likely debate it, but I think it's not. I don't know how many people would dispute that. Let's assume that let's assume this AI stuff all works out. It's an age of abundance, and like people are building with it,
Mm,
and even just now, like this technology can be put into all these different places and work well. Let's imagine that hallucinations goes away. It's no longer a problem. If you imagine that is true, and that we can scale up kind of the techniques where we've learned off of the internet's content, but we're also now able to capture, video everywhere and audio, and we can all of a sudden like have robots that can walk around and navigate the world. If you assume for talking purposes that all of this is true, and that we can scale this up properly, there is no doubt in my mind that AI and robotics will be the two biggest industries ever, ever,
no.
right? More massive than anything. And that's what I think kind of reflects this potential energy of Ilya's company or any of the other AI labs, is that if all of this goes the happy path, and it's unencumbered or not hindered, we don't enter into another winter where we hit like some kind of scaling wall, that we continue to kind of unlock these breakthroughs, then yeah, absolutely. Like the prominent AI labs or the people that bring this to the full kind of potential to bear are going to be worth many, many, many times more than Maersk. And so,
But the funny thing is, just sitting, I speak to so many, in the company I work in, we speak a lot to the CFO level, right? And a lot of people are just not seeing these use cases yet. There's this whole where people are still sitting, in the old Excel sheets, right, everywhere around the world. And then there's these crazy companies talking AI and to the moon and all that, right? Almost, right? There seems to
it,
be the discrepancy is so, the chasm is so big, right?
it,
Uh,
it is. And I think the chasm is big. I think that it comes back to that idea of like, hey, like we're on like an exponential curve, and it's hard to
mm,
see that this is going to happen faster than you think. And you sit here now and you're like, oh, well, it hallucinates. And like, yeah, like it takes a lot of elbow grease to actually get these things into production and working properly, and, have them fully replace a human, and all of that. And even self-driving cars, like we've been trying that for a while now. And it's like,
Yeah, but
while it's
why
safer.
are you why are you then in LiveKit doing the right thing then? Because if you're also putting it into something where it's sort of limited, right? Why are you not betting just on don't care about the rails, just make something where it's fast, right? Just focus purely on the speed, Russ, right? Because when you the other thing is, if you believe that we'll end there with AI, we will not have to put up decisions for it, as it will know what to do when you call it as a patient.
I I think so. And well,
Because if the real world is, and I think it is to some extent, right? I think the real world, or most of the world, is because we also have that for humans, right? Most of the world is a decision tree.
it
You
is.
never put a human saying, "Here's super access to everything in my ERP system. Do whatever you want." You never do that, right? You always go only do this and that, right?
That's. I mean, I think that that's true. Most of the world is a decision tree. What I was going to say is that, like, why do this? Why are we doing this? It's kind of an interesting, at least in my mind, it's an interesting relationship between like what we're doing, where we're going, and then kind of where the world is ultimately going to go.
Mm.
I do think that there is a period of time. So maybe oh, this is kind of a
If you're
weird
gonna
thing.
say
Maybe
30 years now, I'm gonna be
no,
like,
I was gonna say like maybe maybe my philosophy or the adage that I should start to adopt or tell people is like think medium term. I was going to say that like if you think full long term, or at least if I think full long term of where I think things are going to go, I think that there's a world where you actually don't need LiveKit.
mm.
Right? Like if you have these super smart models, they're as good as a human, better than a human. I'll sometimes actually
That's a
tell people,
terrible pitch, Russ, isn't it?
well, it's more meant to be like realistic, but like
Yeah.
it's like I still think that we're going to do amazing things, and we are
Yeah,
already doing
definitely,
amazing
definitely.
things,
Yeah, sure.
but and have amazing use cases. But impermanence, you can't. Nothing is permanent. Right?
No.
Like everything was meant to be rebuilt. And I was telling my
But
colleague about this the other day. He um, he was asking me. He was like, "Well, what happens when this happens?" And I'm like, "Well, there's this movie. I think it's called Samara, or maybe it's called Samsara. I can't remember. I think it's Samsara actually. That's also a company, which is why I'm getting a bit confused. And the founder went to my high school, but." There's this movie where they show a scene of these monks, and these monks like do this sand. They,
mm
they make
Yeah,
like
no, and
this
then they made this
colored sand.
brilliant, yeah,
Yeah, I don't know how long it takes, maybe a month or something
yeah,
to
and
like
then
do
they
this
just
whole thing,
destroy it.
and then just
Ah,
destroy the whole thing, and then they
yeah.
redo it again. And it's meant to kind of uh, communicate that nothing is meant to be
Yeah, but
forever.
that's also why
And
everyone's talking about composable, right? But I'm more like, let's talk about compostable, right?
yeah, what we're doing is we're putting our brick in the wall, and
Mm.
we're helping people leverage this technology to move things forward, to build the next kind of paradigm of computing.
But I totally sympathize with that. I think that's brilliant because that's you're focusing on how can I actually help right now, do things right now for people, right? Never mind the drones with guns. We not you're not going to talk about those anymore. But but my point is just there's this whole the non-falsifiability of this, right? Saying that this will be in 30 years, 20 years, and some people are saying in fewer. But it's basically just an idea that this will happen at some point, right?
Yeah,
And they don't, and no one has a non-hallucinating model, or even if that's necessary, they don't know. It's just it seems non-falsifiable. I can't go and say no, you didn't. Oh, but it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, right? And now it's not just they're actually raising tons of money on this, right? The Ilya thing is raising money
hmm,
on and saying I won't release a product until I have this utopian product. I'm like,
yep,
seriously? You you got a $30 billion valuation saying you won't release until you have a utopian product? What? We
yeah,
got to just move the goalpost all the time because it's gonna come, it's coming, well, you do. So I feel like Russ, of course you're in the valley and all that, but it feels like you're building things right now that works right now, and then you're still dreaming, and that's also okay. But is this really? Can we throw that kind of money at utopian dreams? Is that where we're at right now?
well, it's definitely where some people are at. I guess, like, who are, any a product. If you think of like even a pitch, right? Like a pitch deck or a business plan. I don't know if people even talk about those anymore. But like,
Not in
you
the
know,
valley, right? Just
if you think about like if you think about definitely not in the valley, but if you think about a yeah, people just write the term sheets without
yeah.
barely a slide deck. No, but we're back in ZERP. But I'm kidding. But if you any product, even a pitch, a vision that somebody has, it's worth what people are willing to pay for it, right?
Mm, yeah.
Right? Like, why is Bitcoin a thing? Why is Ethereum a thing? Like, it's all just kind of
Yeah, you
if
love that
people.
Warren Buffett thing where he says, if someone offered me all the bitcoins in the world, I say no, because if I had all of them, they would be worthless.
It's yeah, right. And so, people like on the vision, Ilya is a brilliant
Mm,
researcher,
definitely.
and so the potential that people see in his ability and his team's ability to create AGI, or whatever is beyond AGI. I don't think we know if that's a singularity event. But it to people that there are some people out there that value that
Mm.
vision and his chance of being able to pull it off enough that they're willing to invest. I mean, it's kind of like, I guess folks are free to do with their resources or money as they please. And so, just like I feel like getting a matcha at this cafe, I'm going to go pay $7 for it or some ridiculous price
So
in
you're
the Bay
saying
Area.
that you're saying once again that human intelligence is self-evidencing, right? So would an AI model give Ilya that amount of money? That's the interesting question, right?
I don't know. You got to ask like Signal Fire. I think that they have like their whole like investing model. Maybe it's worth asking their machine learning model if it's worth it.
Well, that actually be fun because it seems like what you're saying now is like people that making a choice, like I want to go take a swim, like I said, right? Because
Right.
I have a curiosity of my own. So
Right. Right.
yeah, so I want
Yes.
to invest in this company because I have a curiosity of my own. Would an AI ever have that? That's super interesting. That's actually a funny little twist here in the end. But super quick here, what's the next frontier for AI, Russ?
I think the next frontier for AI, and this is more like this is looking out maybe this year, next year, for the next couple of years, I would say. Um, I would say we're in a space now where you can actually use the capabilities of these LLMs practically, and I'm not saying for every single thing that
Mm,
humans do, or but you can actually start to use these models practically. So I know a lot of folks are talking about agents, and like that word is started to stop having any meaning. Or mean everything, and thus why it stops meaning anything. But I think that you're going to start to see AI do real work for us and
mm.
increase our productivity in a real way, and unlock more time for people to focus on kind of creative pursuits. And I think creative pursuits are one of the things that kind of are quintessentially human, at
Mm.
least today, um, and hopefully for a very long time. And I think we're going to have more time to be able to do those kinds of things.
That's also what we said in the beginning. You were super busy. I said, "Oh, but working with AI, we shouldn't be that busy, right?" That was before we
That's
started
right.
recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that we haven't hit that moment where AI has unlocked that, and I think that the
Mm.
next frontier now coming up is where that really does get unlocked in a real way and a scaled way. And then yeah, that's what I think will be the next frontier for in the next couple of years.
I agree with that. Making it, making it work for us, do something, making real
Yeah.
change, right, with
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
people, right. So I think this has been a really great conversation, Russ, and I've been really happy to have
I've
you on the
enjoyed it.
show. Yeah, yeah, it's been really fun, and I think we, starting off with 4 dystopian scenarios is always a challenge for any conversation around AI, right? But
Yeah, you put me in the hot seat just right out of the gate. I'm surprised I recovered. Or
it
maybe
took
I don't
so.
know. Maybe after I see the edit, maybe or when the episode comes out, then I'll be like, "Ugh, I actually didn't recover. Never
No, but
recovered."
I think you did actually. I think actually think this ended up in a really nice spot, right? But I also think it shows some nuance that I think is needed in this discussion in general. So it's not just about this will be just the best thing ever, but this will also be something we need to be careful about. And I think and also be something that we need to make sure we know what it's doing. I think you said all of those things, right? So are you a GPT, by the way? Because you can take any position, Russ. That's what I just realized right now. But
Did you call me GPT? Is that what you said?
yeah, so are you a GPT? Because you can take any position, just go
Yeah,
everywhere,
that's true.
Dystopian,
uh,
utopian, whatever you want,
I am just a transformer. Yeah, that's true. All the bad stuff I said, it was a hallucination. So we
Yeah,
gotta, yeah.
right. Awesome. But Russ, I have one final question for you, and I hope you're ready for that one.
Sure. Yeah. Hit me.
So, Russ, what
Hmm.
is the only constant?
The only constant. Um, so I think the quote is that the only constant is change. That's like the age old quote. What was it? Heraclitus is you don't step in the same river twice or something. You never step in the same river twice. So change, I think, is like the thing that most people say is the only constant. What I don't like about that phrasing or framing of it, I would reframe it. So I do think that change is a constant, right? Perhaps the only constant. One thing that I could also see being a constant is time. But time can, time is also, if you think of like Einstein's relativity, like time can bend. So it's not quite a constant. Maybe just in our frame of reference on Earth it is. But what I don't like about change as the framing of being as the only constant is that you have no agency over it. Change feels like an asymptote. You can't touch it. It's change is something that happens to us, not through us. And so I would reframe. I would reframe change as the only constant to possibility as the only constant. We have agency over possibility. Like there are constantly, always opportunities to go and pursue. Like humans can imagine new worlds, building new things, making new decisions that lead in new directions. There's this quote that, let me find it. So there's this book that came out, 10 years after Steve Jobs' death, called Make Something Wonderful. And they give it to all Apple employees when you start at the company. I didn't work at Apple, but I just know this. I don't know why I know this. But Laureen Powell, Steve's wife, there's this introduction in this book. And let me find it here. So Steve says, he once told a group of students, "You appear, have a chance to blaze in the sky, and then you disappear." He gave an extraordinary amount of thought to how to best use our fleeting time. He was compelled by the notion of being part of the arc of human existence, animated by the thought that he, or that any of us, might elevate or expedite human progress. It is hard enough to see what is already there to gain a clear view. Steve's gift was greater still. He saw clearly what was not there, what could be there, what had to be there. His mind was never a captive of reality. Quite the contrary, he imagined what reality lacked, and he set out to remedy it. His ideas were not arguments, but intuitions, born of a true inner freedom and an epic sense of possibility. And so, for me, especially with this AI stuff and drones and guns, possibility is the constant. We can actually influence where we go as a species and where the world ends up. And so that's the way I prefer to think about it.
That's a great constant, Russ. Possibility. It's also a new one. I really like that one. And I like the quote you gave. So thank you so much for that constant. And thank you so much for being on The Only Constant today and talking with me around hype and dystopian fears and dreams and practicalities of AI. I think it's been a really brilliant conversation.
I really enjoyed it, Lasse. Thank you so much, and for the opportunity to have that conversation with you.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.